Resident Evil 4. Me and Resident Evil 4 finally meet. This game actually came out on the GameCube when I was actively into games, but I was a little tyke at the time. That's not true. I was a younger fellow at the time, but ultimately that's an excuse because I just avoid horror things. Horror movies, horror games, not my thing, not my cup of tea, never liked them. Just wasn't a fan. So, you know, I stayed away from this, but I constantly hear people talking about how much they love Resident Evil 4 as it being the crown jewel of the Resident Evil series. And for this spooky season, I decided I would dive in to the remake since it came out this year and give it a playthrough. I've been trying to do horror games in October to try to kind of work up my tolerance. A couple years ago I did Layers of Fear 2. Didn't play anything but League of Legends last year, which is kind of a horror all in itself. But back into single player stuff this year, so thought Resident Evil 4 Remake would be a great one, and that's what we're going to be talking about today on this episode of After the Credits. Thank you guys so much for joining me again. Should be a fun one. In Resident Evil 4, you play as Leon Kennedy, and it is your job to go into this location that has been overrun by what seems like a dictator that's controlling a substance known as amber, and he uses the amber on the villagers of this area and basically turns them into like walking infected zombie type creatures that all worship this one overarching guy, and he's able to do that by using said amber and other experiments that you find out later. It's a pretty fucked up concept, but it's a very interesting concept for the game. But anyways, it's your job as Leon Kennedy to find the president's daughter, Ashley, who is kind of trapped by this cult. And that's what you do throughout the game. You kind of work towards Ashley, and then you try to get Ashley out of the predicament of being in this area. And that's the main plot points. First and foremost, this is a very unique game in the fact that it looks like a third-person shooter, but it's really not a third-person shooter in the traditional sense. So traditionally, when you're playing a third-person shooter and you're walking around and you hold left trigger to aim, you can kind of use the left stick to move your body, and then your right stick basically turns your entire body around. And that's kind of how we've adjusted to video games. But in Resident Evil 4, you essentially aim your gun, and the right stick actually just controls the weapon as opposed to the body of Leon. So it's very interesting, very unique. Took me some time to get used to. I would imagine it took a lot of people time to get used to. I don't know. Let me know in the comments below. I would love to know if that was like a learning period. It might have been not so difficult of a hurdle to overcome on the GameCube era because first-person shooters weren't as prominent back then, or third-person shooters, first-person shooters. They weren't as prominent, so it was this kind of a mix-up was a unique spin on it, so maybe it was easier to get used to the control scheme back in the day. But after all the first-person and third-person shooters that I've played in my life, going to this now is like a wild experience trying to orient myself. And it was an experience, but ultimately I ended up liking it. And I think it's crucial for this game because you do have to be able to shoot enemies in different locations in order to basically be efficient in this game. So shout out to my buddy Kalen, he was around for the majority of the live streams. If you guys want to see my gameplay live, I'm live on Twitch at CAMfidence Live, by the way, so swing over there if you want to catch this stuff live. We have a good time over there. We talk a lot of shit, and, you know, I get bullied, but that's all par for the course. I always allow backseating and all that stuff. We're not going to ramble about this. But anyway, my buddy Kalen was in the chat, and he told me a strategy with the normal villager types in the game, which kind of changed the way I played the game drastically. So instead of shooting people in the head, which was my main goal, I was just shooting people in the head. You know, I was lining up my shots for the head, popping heads off. But what tends to happen when you do that is the head will pop off, and then it'll turn into a twisty enemy, which essentially, once the head goes, big sprouts pop up out of the enemy, and they become a menace. You know, their range is increased, they hit faster. It's just a kind of a nightmare. So he actually told me to actually aim for the legs of the villagers instead, which knocks them into kind of a vulnerable state. And then you can run up and melee attack them to do pretty significant damage. And that'll also help to save bullets. Now, I did play this on normal. I didn't play it on like the hardest difficulty. So I never had an issue with bullets or ammo in this game. I ran into a few different times where I was low on ammo, but it was never really a big issue for me. So I I kind of took that part of the survival horror element out of it. I was never in a really bad spot per se. I actually kind of played this more like an action game than a horror game. But that's just how I went through it. But anyways, that tip from Kaylin was huge on how I approached the villager enemies in the game. And also, this aim mechanic works out really great in the latter parts of the game when you run into the regenerator enemies, because those enemies actually have weak spots that you have to shoot with a thermal scope. And that's obviously easier to do with the current control scheme that Resident Evil offers. Now, you also do have a knife in this game that you can level up. You level up all your weapons, but you have a knife that's kind of a main weapon in this game as well. Your knife does break, though. So you use your knife for parries, and you know, you can use it in close quarters combat. It's just not really advised to do that. You really want to use your knife for stealth kills and those parries. So when people come at you, you can actually hit L1 when they swing to do a parry and kind of knock the enemy off balance. But if you just use your knife as your main combat weapon, and it's, you know, early in the game and you haven't leveled your weapon, which you do through a vendor who I called Watch Dogs Wade the whole game because he looked like a Watch Dogs character. But anyways, very early on in the game, your knife breaks in like 3 hits. It's trash. So it's not advised to only go through with the knife. I think there's probably challenge runs out there where people are playing knife only and handgun knife only, which who knows? Maybe someday I'll do that. But the knife is there as well as kind of a nice alternative and a great way to kind of add a little bit of a defensive option when you start to get overwhelmed by the villagers. That parry comes in handy, and if it wasn't there, the game would be kind of crap. So I'm happy that that knife was in the game and was a fun mechanic. Now, through the gameplay, you do unlock different weapons. There's multiple varieties of shotguns, couple sniper rifles. There's a assault rifle. There's some submachine guns. I kind of stayed away from the submachine guns. I used the assault rifle for a very short amount of time, but the majority of my playthrough was handgun and long rifle for long distance shots. And obviously, the long rifle was used in very important situations when I was dealing with the regenerators, which was just it was a great playthrough. I like that style. I don't know why. I just couldn't see myself using the assault rifle for very long or the submachine guns for very long, just because those weapons, you're going to burn through ammo. And even though I didn't have ammo issues, I just played through the whole game with a single shot handgun the whole time, so I was able to really manage my weapon and ammo inventory efficiently, whereas if I took a submachine gun through the game, I would constantly be out of ammo, at least in my opinion. So that's kind of how I approached it, and that's how I played it, and it worked out well for me. But I'd like to do another playthrough in the future and actually kind of work in some of those other weapons that I didn't use to see how they function. But I just avoided them because I thought it was kind of a risk just due to the ammo shortage. Another thing that's really obvious to mention, this is the Resident Evil engine. This engine is absolutely fantastic. I don't know what the first game was that they put it on. I don't know if it was Resident Evil 6, Biohazard, or whatever that one was. That wasn't 6, that was 7, right? I think that was 7. But then they've done the remakes on this engine, and everyone looks so goddamn good. Resident Evil 2 is people love that game. People, I think, like the remake of 2 better than the remake of 4. I think the remake of 4 is very well received, but I've heard a lot of great things about Resi 2, so I'm gonna have to go back and play that. I actually own it, and I started it, just didn't finish it. But I would like to continue with Leon's story. I guess that would be going back in time a little bit, but probably try to get to that at some point. But this game looks incredibly good, you know, from start to finish. It's just a beautiful game, and I like beautiful games. You know, I'm kind of a graphics snob in a way. I wouldn't say that graphics like affect my overall rating of games per se, but it definitely helps. You know, it helps me get through the game better when the game looks pretty. So this one, not going to be an issue as far as graphics goes. Incredible. The sound design is also incredible in this game as well. The feeling of just popping a round off on your handgun, it just sounds so good. It's so like satisfying and rewarding. Also, there's like little tactile clicks that you do when you're going through your menu and stuff like that. They just hit my ears right, and it just feels good to kind of maneuver around in the menu and you know, shoot stuff because the gun feels powerful. Great sound design. They did an incredible job with that, and I think that's huge. I think sound design is like a massive thing. Like if those pistols sounded like poop, I feel like I would have had a little bit more of a struggle getting through the game. It sounds like a minor thing, but just sound in games is so underappreciated in my opinion. Like the score, the the sound effects, that stuff has got to be top notch. Otherwise, it just feels like it takes the game from like a AAA to like a AA, single A indie genre. So the sound design in this game is fantastic, which you would expect that from a AAA developer putting out a game like this. But it's something to mention. It's incredible, and it's just orgasmic in the ear holes. So good stuff. Now, some of the things I struggled with this game, again, I hate talking about things that were problematic, because I feel like whenever I bring this up, it's like because of my play style, it was an issue. So these may not be relevant to those of you that love Resident Evil 4, so don't fucking crucify me. But I'm just going to go through some of the things that I kind of had issues with. The first thing being, the game wasn't that scary, and I am not necessarily mad about that since I'm a wuss, but there was really only 2 sections in the game that were really scary. The first encounter with the regenerator, for sure, was a moment in this game. And then the other like tension-filled moment was when Leon gets locked up and you take control of Ashley on her quest to kind of get the key to unlock Leon's whole cage, basically, to get him out. And that was it for really tense moments. But I was playing this, like I said earlier, kind of like an action game. Not necessarily probably the best way to go through the game. You know, again, just to mention Kalen, because he was hanging out, he said that my playstyle was incredibly unique because he took situations a lot slower, whereas I went into those situations, aggroed everybody, and then kind of magically found my way through the environment, which he thought was interesting to watch. But I was definitely playing wrong. And I think that might have taken away some of that survival horror-ness, because I was really approaching it like it was an action game and not really slow playing it. I was burning through the game and playing it uniquely, but just wasn't that scary, all things considered. The other thing I wasn't really a big fan of is that whenever the radio call comes in from the home base, or if you're in a cutscene, a lot of the voice comms come through the controller speaker, which is kind of cool, and I know they're trying to work that into a lot of games. Astrobot had a lot of fantastic, innovative haptics, but I don't like when sounds come out of the controller all that much. It just fucking doesn't make me feel that good. Like if I have my headphones on and I'm like really into the game and stuff, and then the speaker on my fucking controller's making noise, and I just don't like it. I don't think it sounds good, so it just doesn't deliver properly. So I thought that was kind of as well. But again, that's just a minor gripe, really, and it's just a personal thing. I just didn't like that part. Didn't like that they implemented the controller voices as much as they did. The other thing to mention, which is just a Resident Evil design issue as a whole, is that this game is really a big escort mission. And I think that it is less annoying in the remake than it was in the original, but ultimately you're still kind of relying on AI Ashley to take care of herself in a lot of situations. There was so many times where like I would turn around, there'd be like in the maze section they have these dogs, and this dog would pop out, and I would turn to snap and shoot the dog, and Ashley would be there, and I'd pop her square in the forehead so many times, which is just kind of annoying. But I think ultimately she was programmed pretty well in this version. I'd be curious to go back to the OG and see how she worked in that game, because the technology was a lot different back then, and this whole game being an escort mission would probably be incredibly annoying on the GameCube. But I'm gonna see if I can play it on original hardware and play the old school again, just to play through it. I heard there's a lot of things different. There's a lot of scenes that were kind of held back from the remake that were more horror-esque, that maybe would kind of trip my survival horror fears up a little bit. Not that I want it, but I kind of did. I don't know. So I'd like to check that out in the future. I don't see it being like something I'll do soon. It's not on the current docket, but something I'd like to take a look at down the line. But all things considered, I think this was a very fun playthrough. I had a lot of fun with it. I don't see myself going back to it anytime soon, necessarily. I know that the platinum trophies require a lot of like really precise runs in hard difficulties and stuff like that. And I don't know if I enjoyed the game enough to do like multiple playthroughs of it. But I think it is a really cool game. It took me about 15 hours in game time to do my full playthrough of this game. And yeah, I had a good time. I just don't see it being a game I go back to right away. Like some games I play through, beat, I just want to go back in. This one I was like, this was cool. I had a great time. I'm ready for the next game project. So ultimately, I really enjoyed it. If you like the OG, I'd recommend checking out the remake if you haven't already. I'm sure that you have. I'm fucking late to the party like I am with all games on this show. As you can tell, everything I review is old as shit except Astrobot. But yeah, this was a great time. I do recommend it if you're looking for kind of a atmospheric, interesting shooter, stealth, survival horror-ish game. Had a lot of fun with it. I think you guys would probably like it too, especially if you like the footage you're seeing behind me. It'll be right up your alley. But other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate all the support on the series. I'm having a fun, enjoyable time making these, and I appreciate you guys hanging out and sticking through these videos that are not scripted. Maybe they should be, but either way, you guys are the best. Love y'all. Make sure to like and subscribe and all that good stuff if you like the stuff and want to see more of it. Other than that, I'm out. Take care of yourselves. We'll talk to you guys soon.